I want to tell you a little bit about my background. I've retired twice, by the way. Most people only do it once, but I retired about 11, 12 years ago from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And while I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was an audit partner and ran a Latin American practice and got to see a lot of unique cultures, even within the Latin American area. But one of the things that was extremely important was I also was on the task force, Diversity and Inclusion Task Force for both Coopers & Lybrand and Pricewaterhouse. So I got to really deal in the strategy of why diversity and inclusion is so important and how cultures comes into play with this. But my experience, living and working in Latin America. And then I did become national president of ALPFA and then became their CEO since 1999. During that time period, some of the things that we're going to talk about were things that I believed in and what I wanted to build in terms of a Latino organization that had some of the culture things that we'll be talking about. You know, the convention's starting, and I used to say, I want this convention not to be a business convention. I want it to be if people are coming to my home, okay? I want it to be family-oriented, and I want it to be relationships, okay? And so when we're talking about some of the Latino cultures, you will see it over the next 4 or 5 days here at ALPFA. And that was intentional, and it's worked. And people tell me that this is a unique conference because of the culture that you will see happening, okay? And we'll go over some of that as well. I get a chance to, when Sid recently retired, it's been 31 days, by the way. So he says, well, what are you doing in retirement? Well, I haven't figured it out because it's only been 31 days. But I am doing work with the ALPFA Institute, and I have the pleasure of working with Suri in these things. I also have a couple of outside, things that I'm doing, including being an outside advisor for Deloitte's diversity and inclusion team, and report directly to their CEO on this. But anyway, I'm looking forward for today, this afternoon, and I will turn it over to Suri.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Surinder. By way of introduction, my diversity journey started back in 1984, 30 years ago, around this time, actually, when at the age of 21, so now you know how many city miles are on this car. At the age of 21, I landed in Houston Airport from India. I kid you not, I was dressed in white bell-bottoms, white jacket, black shirt with a big collar, and platform shoes in 1984. Saturday Night Fever had just hit India, and I thought I was being cool. I landed in Houston, a firm vegetarian, coming to the most red meat-eating state in the Union. And I came to Houston with an accent you could cut with a knife, playing wimpy sports like cricket and badminton and ping pong, not knowing anything about American football or baseball or basketball or any of the American culture. So everything that you see here today is a manufactured product of a very inclusive environment. America is a very inclusive country filled with diverse people just like me. My story is not unusual. But interestingly, after I finished my master's degree in engineering at Rice University in Houston, got an MBA in marketing, by the way, from the City University of New York, drove a taxi cab in New York. I was a hack for 2.5 years, evenings and weekends. Sometime over a beer, I'll tell you stories about that, make your hair curl. Lived through that, joined the predecessor company for Verizon, which used to be called NYNEX, which was the local Bell regional operating company in New York. Ended up, by a complete stroke of fortune, had no idea what would happen. NYNEX became Bell Atlantic became Verizon, and 15 years later, after working very hard, having a lot of good mentors, people like you, good people that helped me through the process, and delivering great outcomes the way you do every single day for the Walt Disney Company, I found myself running a huge P&L, profit and loss entity, $3 billion, 5,000 employees, 3 million customers. Right here, by the way, in Florida. I had Florida and the Carolinas out of Tampa, Florida. and saw a lot of diversity along that journey, supported a lot of ERGs, was senior sponsor for the Latino ERG. Along the way, married, I'm Latino by marriage. Yes, it is, it is possible. Married a beautiful Puerto Rican woman, it was good. And have a beautiful Puerto Rican / Indian son. 6'1", much better than his old man, doing wonderfully well at Indiana University. So if you're sitting there wondering what this 51-year-old Indian guy knows about Latino culture, let me tell you, I've experienced it for the last 25 years at home. Plus, we've done a lot of research. So what you see here is based upon experiential, practical wisdom that Manny and I have, and also some solid research. So that's my diversity journey. Manny, let me hand it over to you for some comments.
Yeah, just real quickly, one of the things about this, first of all, it seems like we have a pretty diverse group here, right? We have, how many are you Latino or Latino by marriage? So raise your hands, okay? So there's a lot of non-Latinos here, okay? And people once asked me, who's going to get the most out of this course, okay, in terms of this? And it's both, okay? For the Latinos here, we will be basically talking about some cultural attributes that many of us default into, sometimes at home, sometimes on a social level, and sometimes at work. And so we'll emphasize that. And by the way, I told you I lived in, I think I told you I worked in Latin America, lived in Mexico City, worked in Chile and Brazil and Argentina and Spain and all these countries down there. Some of these cultures, as you go further south, actually are even bigger, cultural attributes of that society. And so, consequently, we are going to stress that, but you will learn as a Latino, okay, some of the things that are in fact, Lou was even sharing us this morning. Those are real things that happened to me in my life in terms of some of these attributes. For the non-Latinos, okay, you're going to learn why they act that way, okay? You're going to basically say, aha, now I got it, this is what it is. But the thing is that I think that, both of the real purpose of really is an understanding of the culture. And I'm going to tell you, we're not asking anybody to change, because there's benefits of being a Latino and a Latina and some of those cultural benefits. And we're going to talk about how you can basically take advantage of those, okay? And then also some of the things and skills that you need to work on, okay? And so, we hope that you get a lot out of this course, and I'll turn it right over to Suri. You're on.
Thanks, Manny. So the title of this course is Cultural Dexterity. I hope you're going to take 4 things away from here. 4 key things. 1, I hope you find out a little bit about yourself, because all of us are individuals, regardless of what ethnic community we belong to. So self-discovery is number 1. Number 2, this course is about global cultures. So I hope you find out about how 50 different countries around the world think, what they believe, and how they act differently. Number 3, obviously we have a big focus on Latinos and Latinas here, so you'll learn a lot about Latino culture. And lastly, and this is very important, I hope you find out a little bit more about the company that we work for, that we're cast members for, that we love, which is the Walt Disney Company. Now that's a tall order, but I hope you get to do all of these 4 things. And it's going to be a fun ride, so here we go. We're going to start with a video. I want you to see this. It's a 2-minute video, but it captures for me, and I hope it does for you, why this topic is critical and why it's important. James, could you get the video started? Any surprises, by the way? Any thoughts? I didn't know a lot of the stuff up there. Salsa outsells ketchup, and Dora the Explorer outsells. Well, it's amazing how important this constituency has become. And all you have to do to realize this is go to any one of the Disney attractions, any one of the parks, and watch the customer base, right? A lot of Disney customers are Hispanic American customers. And so from a pure business perspective, all of you realize this, I'm preaching to the choir, Hispanic Americans are an important constituency to focus on from a pure business perspective. Certainly, you want to get more employees, attract more Hispanic cast members, retain and engage them, and see them advance within the business. Session outcomes, education on global cultures. I talked about this, experience through self-assessment, exposure to Latino norms, and then execution of the organizational actions that will be needed. As we get into the course, I want to start with the foundation of how cultures are different with a leadership model that applies across global cultures. So what I'm going to share with you is the results of our research findings around leadership. And then I'm going to start with that and apply it to global cultures and to Hispanic cultures so that we can start with sort of the end in mind in terms of professional leadership. What we find in most leadership situations, sales leadership, customer service leadership, people leadership, is that all of the best leaders that we find followers choose to follow. This is based on follower research, not leader research. A lot of books written on how leaders behave differently. Not a lot of books based upon interviewing followers. But based on all of our research with followers, here's what we found. The best leaders in the world don't lead by mandate or fiat. They lead by somehow getting people to want to follow them. It is a critical turn that happens subliminally in people's minds. And you all sitting here who are leaders and who are also followers know this to be true. In the back of your minds, there is a switch. Either it's turned on or it's turned off. When it's turned on towards a particular leader, chances are you're committed to the direction that they're going in. If it's turned off, chances are you might be compliant. There is a difference. All followers tell this over and over and over, that the leaders that they chose to follow through this process of invisible election in their hearts, minds, and souls, completely dissociated in terms of organizational position in the hierarchy, in terms of title, in terms of budgets. It is an internal decision that people make. Do I want to follow this person today or not? The best leaders earn that right to lead from their followers by earning 3 currencies. And we're going to talk about these currencies today in the context of global cultures. But all the best leaders in the world earn these 3 currencies: credibility, trust, and respect. By the way, this is not just theory. We use thousands of variables to correlate this to come up with these 3 things, okay? Next step, how do they earn these 3 things? Credibility, trust, and respect. They earn those currencies by building 3 assets of impact: results, relationships, and resources. So great leaders earn the currencies of credibility, trust, and respect by building the assets of results, relationships, and resources. The way they build those assets is by making 3 investments of intention. Assets are built by investment. In this case, you need 3 investments of intention: competence, character, and capabilities. I want you to remember this. If you take nothing else away from this session, this will resonate with you as I describe this a little bit more to you, okay? Currencies earned by assets, assets earned by investments. Those are the investments. And by the way, those 10 things that you see listed under the investments are the most highly correlated investments to those currencies. So for example, competence. It's not just about your job. It's about the industry, competition, customers, cross-functional, process, people, platform, company culture, functional, and job. Those are the competencies most associated with earning the currency of respect. When you look at character, those are the 10 character traits most correlated to earning trust and building relationships. And in capabilities, those 10 capabilities are most strongly correlated with earning credibility and delivering results. They break out into senior level, mid-level, and entry-level elements. Okay, so for example, on the capability side, when you're entering, planning, collaborating, communicating are important. At mid-level, when you're managing people, target setting, managing, and motivating. When you're senior level, envisioning, developing, negotiating, decision-making. Obviously, the split is not perfect, but these are the most, sort of highly correlated splits. So let's look at each of these, okay? Respect through resources, resources through competence. That's all about IQ. How smart are you in your space? How much are you a master of your domain? Okay? IQ, it's all about the head. Trust through relationships, relationships through character. It's all about EQ. Have you heard about emotional quotient? I'm sure Disney teaches this a lot. Emotional quotient has been shown to be correlated with success in life even more than intelligence quotient. And you can measure it just like IQ. So this is all about EQ, emotional quotient, and about the heart. Capabilities through results, credibility through results, results through capabilities. We call that execution quotient, or XQ. XQ, it's all about the hands. This model of leadership has really survived the test of very rigorous research across multiple constituencies, multiple sectors. And what we find is IQ plus EQ plus XQ equals LQ, or leadership quotient. Now, I want to mention a couple things about this. These three things, respect, trust, and credibility, seem to be sort of about the same commodity, but they're not. They're actually highly uncorrelated, highly independent dimensions. I'll give you an example. Do you know people who are very good at delivering results very, very quickly and have high credibility where you work? Do you know people like that? I see some people nodding their heads. Now, you don't have to tell me who they are, but I want you to picture these people in your minds. Do they sometimes rupture relationships as they are delivering results? It could happen. Lots of times, change agents who are focused on delivering outcomes very fast don't have the time to invest in building relationships and in earning trust. Okay? It's just a natural way things happen. Your credibility quotient could be extremely high, but your trust quotient might be quite low. I can tell you myself as a senior leader at Verizon, where, by the way, if you don't deliver results every quarter, maybe you'll have 3 quarters to survive, the 4th quarter you're gone. It's a very outcome-oriented company. The way I made it up to the top at Verizon is by focusing relentlessly on outcomes. And sometimes I had to have very tough conversations with people and push them out of their comfort zones to deliver their outcomes. My trust quotient, to be honest with you, early on in my career, quite low. But I moved up because the company incented me to move up. Over time, I realized that I need to be more balanced between results and relationships, and actually started to pull back on the pace of results delivery if needed to, so that I could bring more people along with me. Similarly, do you know people who are very, very smart about what they do? They are subject matter experts in their space. I spent a lot of time at McKinsey after I left Verizon. I was a partner at McKinsey, and I don't know if you know about them, very highly prized strategic consulting firm. Lots of very smart people at McKinsey, but very, very prickly people. In fact, it was a badge of honor to work with senior partners who were really smart about their industry or their sector or their function, but they were tough to deal with. I worked with so-and-so, right? Because they were so smart, it was tough for them to relate to the general population because they felt people didn't understand them. So you could have a very high respect quotient, very low trust quotient, okay? By the same token, I'm sure you know people who are wonderful at relationships, but have a tough time delivering outcomes and results because they're so focused on the relationship that they don't want to push the envelope as much as they probably could and should. So these 3 dimensions are uncorrelated. Also, these 3 dimensions are evaluated differently for each one of you by yourself, because we have an instrument that calibrates and measures this. You will evaluate yourself in one way on these dimensions. The people you report to may evaluate you differently. The people who work for you may evaluate you differently. And the people around you, your peers, will look at you differently. Depending on the stakeholder group you focus on, these scores are going to be different. And so what we do when we talk about leadership is not just a particular score, but also who are you talking to and how are you viewed by people around you. Now, here's item number 3 that's important. How you actually earn these 3 currencies in these approaches depends upon your cultural orientation. So there's a critical link to how people earn these 3 currencies based on their culture. So let's talk a little bit about culture. There is visible culture, which is what you can see, how to kiss, bow, and shake hands. Plenty of books on it. There is hidden culture, which is the values, beliefs, and philosophies that each one of you have, that you may or may not even recognize and be aware of, right? And then lastly, there's the core culture, which is the innermost layer of culture, that, history, mythology, geography, folklore. Okay? The visible culture you can read from any book. There are plenty of courses. Core culture, you need to take a full degree course to really understand. But hidden culture, this is brilliant. Because you know what? There are millions of ways in which people may talk differently and interact differently, but all research indicates there's only 7 ways in which they think differently. And we're going to talk about those 7 ways today, okay? Here are those 7 ways. The ways in which you earn respect are influenced by 2 global variables: hierarchical perspective, and we'll talk a little bit about this, and group focus. How hierarchical are you, and how focused are you on the group versus the individual, okay? The way in which you earn trust will be determined by relationship orientation and communication indirectness. How oriented are you towards relationships, and how direct or indirect are you in communicating? And then your credibility is going to be driven by your thoughts and beliefs and philosophies around time control, change tolerance, and work importance. Those are the 7 ways in which global cultures are different, okay? So now I'm going to take you through the first of these, and we're going to do a quick exercise. You have in front of you a participant guide, and some of these slides are in your participant guide, so feel free to take notes there and also, look at these slides there. So this is the first variable, hierarchical perspective, authoritarian versus egalitarian. Okay, we're going to talk through this. When it says the number 1, I want you to look at those questions and rate yourself. Forget about cultures and everything, right? Just rate yourself as a person on those 5 questions that you see. Give yourself a score of 1 if you strongly disagree with the statement, and a score of 5 if you strongly agree with the statement, and anywhere in between, depending on how strongly you agree or disagree, okay? Score between 1 through 5 of those 5 things. Generally prefer a formal, structured environment. Like for my boss to set my priorities. I think people should acknowledge rank at work. Like to have a clear definition of my role. Prefer my work approved by my boss regularly. 1 through 5. Then add up your score. Okay? Your score should be somewhere between 5 and 25. Okay? Now, once you've done that, you see what it says, the number 2, and you see a grid with columns with ranges of numbers. Put an X in the column where your score belongs. Right? So if you scored, for example, a 15, put an X in the middle column. Yeah, I see people giggling already, peering over each other's shoulders. A score, if you have a score of 23, put an X on the rightmost column and so on, right? Put an X in the column where your score belongs. Okay? I'm going to ask you a few questions, show of hands. Show of hands here. How many people were between 22 and 25? How many people? Interesting. Nobody. Nobody. James, did you raise your hand? Okay, 1 person. Okay. How many people were between 18 and 21? Okay, we see a few more, so we see maybe about 7 or 8 people, okay? How many between 14 and 17? Okay, so right in the middle, it's about 10 or 12, okay? Between 10 and 13, That's about 10 or 12, okay? And then 5 to 9. How many 5 to 9s? That's about maybe 8, okay? So now, here's the distribution. This is the distribution of the people who elected to show their hands, right? Nobody at 22 to 25, 18 to 25, about 8, 14 to 17, about 10 or 12, 10 to 13, 10 or 12, and 5 to 9, about 8. So it's sort of an even distribution, but it's skewed to the left. Now here's what it means, by the way. The composition of this class, I mean, if on the extreme right is highly authoritarian, on the extreme left is highly egalitarian. So I'd say on average, this particular group is kind of right down the middle, okay? And you've got a few people that are more on the egalitarian side, about 20 or so, okay? And you have a few people that are either in the middle or slightly authoritarian. Now, you know exactly where you are because you got X to mark the spot, right? So this is part of your self-awareness. Now here's, when you go over to the right-hand side where it says the number 3. Plotted on the same grid where you just plotted yourself are 50 countries and where they break out on this continuum, okay? So on the extreme left, very low authoritarian, meaning highly egalitarian cultures. Australia, Canada, Denmark, Israel, Netherlands, New Zealand. Have any of you been to any of these countries or worked in any of these countries? Anybody wants to share any experiences you have that could relate to this? Think about that question for a second. I'll give you an example. I visited Israel once for work. We're working with an Israeli entrepreneurial company. I was in a conference room with about 10 people, and which included the CEO, some of his direct reports, and also some middle and frontline folks. I could not tell from the conversation around the table who was the CEO and who was the middle manager and who was a frontline person. They all went at each other hammer and tongs. It was absolutely amazing that the level of authenticity of debate, the level of constructive dissent that was not just allowed but that was encouraged was absolutely amazing to me. I couldn't believe that somebody, middle management, could be speaking this openly, challenging the opinions that were being raised. That's a very uniquely Israeli culture, very, very egalitarian. Any similar examples that you guys have based upon your experience in these countries? Don't be shy. Anybody? I can guarantee you, if you went to, for example, Netherlands or Denmark, places in Europe, you'll find the culture to be extremely different. Australia is the same way, okay? You will not realize it until you go and work there, how different we are. We look the same, we speak the same language, but we think very, very differently. Now, go on the extreme right. If you look at the countries that are highly authoritarian, a lot of the countries are in the Middle East and in the Far East. So Brunei, India, Indonesia, Iran, Japan, Malaysia, Pakistan, all of these countries. Now, I come from India, okay? The first few years, I had the toughest time calling people by their first names. It was always Mr. or Ms., and it was very, very difficult for me to call people by their first name because it's so ingrained in you to offer that level of respect for hierarchy. Oftentimes I'd find myself going along with deadlines that were unmakeable simply because I didn't want to say, no, this is not doable. And I thought for the longest time it was just me being unassertive. Some of it was me, but some of it was the culture that I came from. There's one fly in Disney World, and it's going.
He comes and visits me once in a while.
But I couldn't for the longest time say no. I still have trouble with Manny sometimes saying no to him, and he'll use the opportunity to impose unmakeable deadlines on me to say let's go. But this happens. This is very real, folks. Okay, this is these folks' world. Okay. Now, look at where the USA is. It's marked in red. Very low authoritarian culture in general, on the low side, quite egalitarian. Look at where the Latino cultures are that are here, that are bold-faced. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Caribbean, which, by the way, includes Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Cuba, and Spain. Right? They're more on the authoritarian side. USA is more on the egalitarian side. So on that grid, where you've got an X, I want you to put a Y where the Latino culture is, because we are focused a little bit more on Latinos today. So I would put it somewhere mostly in the 18 to 21 column, okay? Please do that. Now, what do these cultures represent when you are in the workplace. How do you distinguish an authoritarian culture from an egalitarian culture? If you go up to where it says number 4, you'll see some examples of authoritarian and egalitarian. So low authoritarian, I want you to look at these bullets because I'm going to ask you a question after this. Group decision making common, employees treated as equals, important to delegate responsibility, first name addressing common, signs of position frowned upon, managers visit subordinates' offices, meetings combine levels, everyone expected to speak up, dress may be informal, upward mobility is easier and quicker. On the right-hand side, boss makes decisions, asking too much considered weak. I can tell you if you went to Japan or India and you asked employees in the interest of empowering them, how do you think we should solve the problem? They will look at you like you had 2 heads. Because they would say, you're the boss, you get paid to know that. Why are you asking me? The very practice that we prize here would be looked as ineffective and weak in those cultures. In Japan, true story, I was visiting Kyoto, negotiating with fishermen's unions. This is for Verizon. And I didn't realize we were sitting at a table, okay, and it was like an oval-shaped table, and I had my team on one side, the Japanese team on the other side. For some reason, maybe to get a better view, I got up and moved to the next chair. Do you know that everyone on the other end of the table moved? Can you think why? You're expected to sit opposite a person of a similar rank. And if you move, the other side also moves. It's amazing to watch this. I guarantee you, if you tried this experiment 10 times, 10 out of 10 this will happen in Japan. That's how strongly hierarchical, that culture is. So you can see, titles and surnames common, cars, clothing, office matter, empowering can be disruptive, meetings only with same level, subordinates speak rarely, if at all, dress more formal, promotions not easy and take time. Now, you know the characteristics of authoritarian and egalitarian workplace cultures. I want you to ask yourself this question and be bold to answer it for me. Where do you think Disney lies in this continuum? Directionally, where do you think Disney lies? Depends, so elaborate, yeah, please.
Well, depending on the organization, you might find they kind of flanking plus or minus 1 sigma, if you will, for that belt distribution.
Depending on where you are within Disney, okay? Anybody has an opinion about, based on where they are, what the culture is? And you don't have to tell us where you are, but you can speak up, guys, don't worry, it's a safe environment. Nobody believes me. Eugene, there you go. Good man.
Here, Eugene.
Cowards.
I think our culture is highly authoritarian.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? Now that's an amazing realization. You want to elaborate on that a little bit, Eugene? Like, you think the characteristics are more on the right-hand side, Eugene? On the
Yeah, I think so. I think the characteristics on the right side speak to how we, in many instances, have to operate our business because the business is built on repeatability and consistency.
There you go.
So I understand the reason, but I think the honest truth is that it's highly authoritarian because I think for many people, they hate to admit it because of the influence, which is why I think they have to be quiet.
Well said, my friend. Now, here's anybody with a different opinion than you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I would just expand on that to say that for someone who's worked in a different segment within the larger Disney organization, I think within the company there's differences in that authoritarian level, and I find that Parks as a segment is further to the right.
Further to the right. And what would be a segment that might be further to the left? Any thoughts? Imagineering.
Yeah.
Imagineering. Which is where he works. Beautiful. I know a person back there had a comment also. Anybody else? Any comments?
I was just going to say, we were chatting that the more creative organizations within the Walt Disney Company tend to at least presume to be a little more egalitarian because of the collaboration and necessity for that. Even if the stratas still exist, it's not as apparent.
That's a great point. Now, I want you to do this, one final thing on this grid. Put a Z where you think Disney is on the same grid. I want you to put a Z where you think Disney is and the place the particular organization you're in is. So now you have an X, you have a Y, and you have a Z, okay? You now have a sense of where you are on this dimension, where your organization is on this dimension, and where the Latino culture is on that dimension. That self-awareness is important, okay? If, by the way, I don't know where, maybe your X's, Y's, and Z's are in the same spot. I don't know. Maybe they are in different spots. I will tell you this. If your X is in a different column than your Z, you will need to flex to get to the Z. You will need to demonstrate cultural dexterity to get to the Z. If you're in a highly authoritarian culture and you're a highly egalitarian person, I will tell you this. You will have a vague sense of discomfort getting up in the morning and coming into work every day. You may not realize why, but you'll feel somehow, in some way, you don't quite fit. When you go through these 7 variables that we're going to go through today, you will have a great sense of why you fit and why you don't fit, and what you need to do to feel better about fitting in. I will guarantee you that, okay? But those X's, Y's, and Z's are important. Manny?
Yeah. And we'll be going through the 7 variables, but not as much depth as Suri covered on this one for you guys to understand it. But we'll go through these other 6 with very similar taste. But it's a great exercise. So now the Latino culture, okay? Let's talk a little bit more about it. And I think you alluded to it, where Mexico and all the Latin American countries, we're at. But automatic deference to authority, okay? Respect because of age, power, knowledge, not because of you've earned it, okay? I was really surprised when I showed up in Mexico and they called me Don Manuel. I felt like it was the Godfather. No one ever called me Don Manuel, okay? But as soon as I got into Latin America, in all those countries, Don Manuel, how are you? And titles were very important. I'm so glad I went down as a partner because they sure treated the partners a lot different than the non-partners. Okay, and I will tell you that titles were important. Okay, very early in the conversation, they will ask, "What's your title?" So respect almost immediately. Okay, and for sometimes that's great, right? Starting to get, but Latinos tend to avoid criticizing, challenging, expressing contradictory opinions to their managers. Why? Because it might show disrespect. Right? And in an organization like Disney, what are you guys looking for? You are actually trying to get people to tell you how they feel, tell you what they think is right or wrong or whatever it is. But the Latino culture at times tends not to do that. In fact, confronting a superior, especially in public, may be viewed as disobedient, okay, in some of these cultures, in these strong cultures. The accepting instructions without question about their managers, without even questioning it. How many of you had, it's interesting, in the Latino culture, they may agree to a deadline and agree to do something, and you know up front that you can't do it, but you're not going to say you can't do it. And you see a lot of Latinos going into this situation in which they know they're not going to make the deadline, but they'll accept it because that's the right thing to do in their minds. And in fact, Latinos may see, they see themselves as respectful, but what do the non-Latinos look at it? Passive, right? Passive, which probably isn't a great trait when you're going all the way up the ladder. So what are the key elements to remember? Okay, that for Latinos, okay, we automatically give respect because of age, knowledge, that. But in the corporate level, respect is earned through subject matter expertise. Okay? What you know gets you respect, not because of who you are and what your title is and everything else. The other thing is in the interviewing process, okay, interviewing, you're a peer. Okay, you're intellectually peers, but in the Latino culture, they may see entirely different. between the person interviewing and the person being interviewed. The constructive dissent is an obligation, okay? Well, it's not only an obligation, but I bet you in corporate America, it's almost a requirement, okay? They're expecting you to give constructive dissent if it's necessary to say. They want, leaders, what's one of the biggest traits of a leader? It's having an opinion, right? Leaders have opinions. And the thing is that having a defensible, independent opinion is a sign of leadership, okay? And I think that this is an important trait that we need to emphasize somewhat because people are looking at you. Do you have an opinion? And so being quiet and not asking questions because it's probably not the best thing to do. So what can you do with Disney and other, and within your jobs, to really kind of understand this? Well, one of them, emphasize strong support for your mentorship and sponsorship programs. Latinos love this kind of stuff, okay? They expect to have sponsors and mentors, and I think if you stress that, that's good for you, okay? And Disney has a lot of those. De-emphasize your own position and tenure, because if you don't, okay, they're going to default into that respect. They won't be asking you any questions. They're just going to say yes and yes and yes and yes. So it's your responsibility to basically kind of de-emphasize and put them, when we say intellectual peers, okay, treat them as peers. Don't treat them at a different class level. And like I said, in Latin America, boy, I sure saw a lot of that. Create peer-to-peer environment, making it easy to push back and raise concerns so that it's okay to ask questions. In fact, elicit questions. Try seeing how they probe for opinions, okay? I think it's important for them to understand that they are expected to give opinions on these things. So, yes, Melinda? Sure.
So going back to slide 8, some of those characteristics that you have, like avoid criticizing, challenging, does that vary based on acculturated Latinos or bicultural versus not?
Most of the non-cultural are the ones that actually do it. Like I said, remember, as you go further down south, those people that have not been around, okay, the ones that have not been in the U.S. long, basically use the characteristics that they follow. Okay, right. So you get better at dealing with many of these things the longer, whether it be first generation, second generation, the second, third generation, understand these things. Okay, and they learn from these things. But the thing is that remember, you default a lot of these things when you're at home or doing socially, and like I said, sometimes even at work, they forget this stuff, and it becomes natural for them to do it. I've seen people, consultants, that teach this kind of stuff in a room with and I'll just say, I have an Asian affiliate that we work with. She was in a room with a bunch of other Asians. What she used to teach as a consultant, she did herself. She didn't even speak. There were Asian men in there, and she basically defaulted into what most Asian women do. Not everybody, but a lot of Asian women just sit there and subservient because there's Asian men in the room and the discussion there. And so it is real. I mean, these defaults, but they do vary depending on their experience. And I think what's really important is just to understand that some of us have some of these traits, okay, within us. And the difference between slide 8 and 9 is what can we do about them? Okay? In other words, being knowledgeable about it.
And Belinda, I'll say there's actually 3 moderators to this. Okay, one is your immigration status. Are you a first-generation immigrant versus born and brought up here? Number 2 is your age. Latino millennials behave very differently than folks from a different age group. Okay, and then the third thing is whether it's a social context, a personal context, or a professional context. Like Manny mentioned, personal, people behave differently in personal lives than they do in professional lives. So yeah, those 3 things do make a difference. And the other thing I want to mention, if some of you are thinking, I'm Latino and I'm not like this, that's perfectly legitimate. He's not like this. Tell him to not express an opinion, forget it, right? So my point is, we are all, that's why we started with an individual assessment. We didn't start with your cultural assessment, because all of us are unique, right? These are the norms, these are the averages, but averages hide a lot of sins, right? There are standard deviations off of the average, And so people are going to be different. So I never want people to say, well, this doesn't define me. It shouldn't define you. But this is just a way of understanding the average behavior of a certain type of, does that make sense? Yeah. So, by the way, the other thing I will say to you is, if Gene's assessment, in different parts of Disney, there is an authoritarian culture, then I would say to you, if you are also along those lines, maybe a perfect fit. Don't ask any questions, just execute, Watch the detail and execute. Maybe this is a perfect fit. You don't have to do anything differently. But if you're in a more sort of imagineering, and creative sort of environment, then maybe there is a need. And so the idea is, are you innovative in generating ideas and intrepid in claiming them? Okay. Here's the next one, and I'm going to go through these others rather quickly. So same thing. You guys know the drill now. 5 questions. Score yourself 1 through 5. I'll give you a couple minutes. I'm going to push it along a little bit. Okay, so same type of deal. Go to the grid and put an X marks the spot of where you are on the grid. And let me ask you the question, how many people were 5 to 9 on this? 5 to 9s? A couple of them, okay. How about 10 to 13? Maybe, that's quite a few. It's about 10 or 12, okay. 14 to 17? A lot more, there's about 15. 18 to 21, there's 4 or 5. 22 to 25, maybe 1 or 2. Okay, so again, this is a very normal distribution. A lot of folks in the middle, quite a few folks 18 to 21, quite a few folks 10 to 13. Now keep that in mind, because this grid, on the extreme left, it is a heavy focus on me, individualistic. On the extreme right, it's a heavy focus on we, team focus, okay? So wherever you are kind of captures your sensibility of where you are on me versus we. Now, go to what it says, the number 3, and you'll see the same countries on the same grid, okay? Look at where the USA is, highly individualistic culture. Now, I don't know if that surprises you or not, because maybe some of you are saying, well, we're a team-based country. We work well in teams. Okay, but the reality is, when you look at the professional workplace practices, and I'll come to that in a second, on average, the US workplace culture is highly, highly individualistic. So is Canada and New Zealand. Look on the extreme right. Again, a lot of Asian countries, highly team-oriented. Look at where the Hispanic countries are, the Latino countries. They're slightly more moderate to high team focus. So again, when you look at Mexico, and you look at the US, right? Geographically, very close. Culturally, very far apart on this particular variable. Wouldn't think of it if this wasn't presented to you, right? So my encouragement to you is use these things as a lens for you to view people in your organization who might be Latinos. Doesn't mean they'll fit into this, but use this as a framework almost to make decisions and to think about what the culture is like. Look at the workplace cultures, by the way, up on top. Low group focus, don't rely on group for solutions, acknowledge individuals, not group, promotions on individual merit, decision making faster, implementation slower, because individuals make decisions, but because consensus may or may not have been achieved, you might run into challenges or opportunities to make magic, right, over the course of the decision-making process. Employees seek to stand out. Individual ops for problem solving, focus on nuclear family, individual tastes in offices, meetings maximize efficiency, meetings for information exchange. This is highly individual. On the right-hand side, groups come up with solutions. Do not single out people for reward. In fact, in some countries like Japan, They will be embarrassed if you singled out a person for rewards, and they want group-based rewards. Promotions based on team results, decision-making slower, implementation faster. Employees seek to fit in, provide opportunities to work in groups, focus on extended family, individual expression frowned upon, meetings take longer, meetings just for voicing opinions. Highly inefficient, but effective in their goals. Get everyone's opinion on the table, okay? Those are the characteristics of individual versus group professional cultures. Same question to you. Where do you think Disney is on that grid? Me versus we. Any thoughts? Where do you think, based on where you are at Disney or your experience, is it more of a team-based culture or more of an individual culture based on these characteristics? Team? You say team primarily? Yeah. Any other opinions that may contradict that?
I'd like to know what Eugene thinks.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to. That's
As a
okay.
canvas, he's up. Everybody's warmed up. Go ahead, yeah.
I'll try. I don't want to stand out, sorry. So I do agree with what the rest of the team are saying, that it's a team environment. We foster a team here in the company. However, but based on the characteristics, just like you say on the left-hand side, promotions are on an individual merit, and also because of that, you tend to seek to stand out on an individual basis, even though you're working on a team. And that's my humble personal opinion.
Excellent, excellent. So you can, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
The highest award that you can attain at Disney is an individual.
There you go.
It always made me wonder, I think we say a lot about collaboration and working as teams, but I think it's different than how we carry it out,
Great point.
or how we reward it.
That's right. That's a great point. I want you to think this is where the real learning is, right? So Disney talks a lot about teamwork, and teamwork is important. But in the way incentives are structured and reward and recognition happens, it is more individual. Just as in the same way, from an external perspective, it may look like Disney is quite egalitarian. But to Eugene's comment, in some places like parks where execution is critical, it is very authoritarian. You'd never know it from the outside. Everyone's smiling. But this is an important realization, okay? Now, I'll hand it over to Manny in a second, but put a Z where you think Disney is, okay? You have an X, put a Y where Latino cultures is, okay? And put a Z where you think Disney is. Those are the intercultural distances between yourself, Latinos in your organization, potentially, and Disney. And those are the distances to be mitigated and traversed, okay? Imagine if you are like an average Latino person who is highly team-oriented in an individually aligned culture. We have seen examples of this, and Manny is going to talk to you. There can be huge opportunities for improvement just in the way you write your appraisal and move ahead in the company.
Actually, let's stay on that point. Appraisal, okay? You're evaluating a person, and you basically ask them, how'd you do? The team did great. Boy, they all pitched in. They all did a great job. Yeah, but how did you do? Oh, everybody contributed, but it was a team effort. That person's not talking about himself, right? Or herself. Okay, and that's an example of that we versus me, when the team is more important than individually. And yet, as an expectation as their boss or somebody that's helping them, what are you really looking for? You're looking for some of that individualistic type of thing that I think is important. So Latino, places sometimes, look at this, places the needs and goals of the group above those of the individual. And the example of the interview, you're interviewing somebody, they're basically talking about the group instead of themselves. They promote cooperation and collaboration with others. By the way, this is a great trait. So it's not necessarily a negative trait. Being able to work as a group and a team at Disney is very important based on what, the feedback that we got here as how Disney works. So it's not necessarily a negative. Loyalty to a group or friend may be more important than getting a promotion. That's a little tough, but that happens, okay? Some Latinos may have a hard time supervising their peers You know why? Because they don't want to appear that they're individually more smarter, have more knowledge or anything else. So they kind of, you know. But I think the propensity to use group decisions, making models to promote decisions that are best in group. What takes longer, by the way, a group decision or individual decision? Right? Have you ever heard about, you know, it's interesting. If your boss went into a staff meeting and said, let me tell you how I feel about this thing, okay? And then asked you, how do you feel? Well, who's going to go get the boss just told us how he feels, right? So, you know, in a situation like that, maybe it's best not to go in and tell them what you feel. Okay, and when I've been chair, you know, I've been in numerous, you know, boards. I'll tell you, being the chair, you got to listen a lot, okay, but make sure you're not so authoritarian in the sense of being able to step out there and tell them your opinion, because you won't get good feedback. Once you, the boss or the leader, basically says, this is how I feel, it changes the environment, okay. But no doubt that Latinos, you know, we versus me approach to reporting in both, you know, writing and speaking. I mean, they very much focus much more on the we versus the me, okay? And what happens there, by the way? Do you think, you heard the word branding yourself? Do you think you would brand if you're more into the we versus the me? Does Disney have, the Leadership Institute has a branding type of a, don't they have one of their, is branding? I'm sure they basically distinguish it. Basically, you have to step out, basically, and you basically, you know, this thing, the second piece here, even though sharing and collaboration is important, individual contributions are expected, okay? Individual ambition and goal setting for growth is encouraged, okay? But I think it's extremely important for you to remember that you have to brand yourself. People need to know who you are. This last piece here, personal accountability, ownership of career development is a sign of leadership. I'm sure you have a lot of sponsors and mentors at Disney, okay? But let me just tell you one thing. You will never succeed if you rely on them and them only to get you advancement, okay? Your career is more important to you than anybody else. Your career is more important to you than anybody else. And if you don't believe that, okay, I mean, you will see the fact that, you know, by the way, that doesn't mean sponsors are not important. They're extremely important. Mentors are extremely important. But your career has to mean more to you than anybody else, okay? And I think that's one thing that we have to continue to remember as Latinos. Emphasize this, you know, at Disney, you know, one of the things that is important, because we believe in the we believe in it, I think it's important that Disney emphasize Latino groups, whether it be ERGs or just the fact that you are supporting the Latino within your company. But at the same time, I think you need to probe and get people to be better individual contributors and to understand that their individual performance is what's going to lead to great group performance. I think that's the key. Every team member, a lot of people like to use sports analogy, basically say, you know, if you have a terrible hiker on a football team, the quarterback's not going to do very well, right? And if you have really poor receivers, the quarterback's not going to do very well. And if you don't have great blockers, the quarterback's not going to do very well. So although the group performance of that football team is important, every single person on that team has to have an individual contribution and do great at what they do. And that's what I think you need to continue and I, you know, that's probably why the highest award, you know, is an individual contribution. You know, what is that award, by the way? Legacy, okay. Yeah. I think one way is to probe, explore decision-making process used, you know, challenge people to speak more about themselves, okay? That it's okay to talk about themselves, okay? Some people, you know, think, you know, they're bragging. By the way, we are a very humble culture. We're a very humble culture. And we don't go out of our way all the time to talk about each other. But there are other cultures who will talk about themselves all the time. They will tell you what they did, okay? And they will remind you about it. And the Latino will sit in the room and just let it go, okay? And so please understand that, okay? That we need to bring it out of them. You know, what are they really doing, who they really are, versus just assuming that they're doing it.
So again, I'm not quite familiar with the position of resource groups at Disney, but I can tell you, having worked with a bunch of other companies in terms of recruiting Latinos and so on, a big plus if you're interested in recruiting more Latinos, in engaging and retaining more Latinos, is the sense of community that you build. So we've gone to companies that have had issues with retaining and attracting Latinos, and simply by revitalizing their resource group structure, especially for Latinos, and by marketing that better in interviews and in recruiting processes, they've been able to increase their intake of Latinos and Latinas. Because of this, there's a group focus, okay? The other point I will make to you is, if you have individual-based forums, you know, in some cases, for example, you have leadership reviews. I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere about leadership casting calls, for example, at Disney, that bring, you know, individuals to the table and expect them to present their individual contributions. Think a little bit about Latinos in that context and how well they may or may not perform, given this natural cultural bias. And you know, just be aware and more sensitive to that. So here is an exercise, and I want you to really just come up with any thoughts that you have. Any ways, you've heard now about two of these things, hierarchical perspective and group focus, okay? Me versus we, authoritarian versus egalitarian. Any ways in which you might consider either modifying or emphasizing more your managerial behaviors if you have Latinos in the organization, or your recruiting behaviors? Any takeaways? Because so far you've heard a lot, but oftentimes the maximum learning happens when you actually think about how you're going to, you know, act on what you learn. So could I ask you to reflect for a bit? And anybody can say this. How do you think you might behave a little bit differently in the workplace, either in managerial conversations or in recruiting conversations? Any thoughts? Especially with Latinos and Latinas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, making a conscious effort to ask for opinions more, and really, if you don't get it, you know, continue to probe until you get it. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, back over there.
I happen to have two great Latina managers, and you've reinforced a lot of our existing behaviors in our department, but I think one of the things that has really been reinforced is that sense of family and community that they bring to our team, and also their value of the team. And that's been quite the eye-opener, I think.
That's amazing. That's an amazing insight.
Yep.
It's important, a sense of family.
When we go over a couple of variables, you know, that we have left, you will see that. But you're right, that's a home run.
Great. Thank you. Well, continue to think about this, because you know this is important. So those were the first two respect variables. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trust variables, the relationship orientation. Okay. Again, same 5 questions. I want you to rate yourself quickly on those 5 things, 1 through 5. So same type of deal, X marks the spot on the grid on relationship orientation, somewhere score between 5 and 25. How many people are 22 to 25? How many people 22 to 25? Not a lot, okay. 18 to 21, okay, you've got 4 or 5. 14 to 17, you've got about 10 or 12. 10 to 13, a lot more, maybe about 15. 5 to 9, it's a couple, okay. So again, on this grid, 5 to 9 is very low relationship orientation. 22 to 25 is extremely high. The group is slightly, again, skewed to the left on this, is my sense. A lot more people 10 to 13, 14 to 17. Nobody 22 to 25, you know, a few people 18 to 21. So it's slightly to the left. Again, you know individually where you are. Look at the countries on the right-hand side. USA, very low relationship orientation. Now, does that surprise you? We're a friendly country, aren't we? But very low relationship orientation. Why do you think that that's the case? Why would we say that the US is relatively low relationship orientation? It is transactional. It is transactional. A lot of the relationships tend to be transactional. Relationships are built easily. So if you're thinking, but we are the friendliest country on earth. We make friends very easily, and that is true. But friendships are dissolved very easily also. Physical proximity, professional proximity are important aids to maintaining relationships, okay? If people move to a different part of the country, to a different job, maybe you still maintain touch, but maybe not to the extent that you did before, okay? And so there's an angle about transactional relationships, there's an angle about permanence and sustainability of relationships. And the third reason is because in the US, having a relationship is not critical to getting work done.
At least they don't think so.
It is, I'll show you in a second how other countries are. On the right-hand side, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, UAE, Africa. Go to any of these countries. I negotiated in Saudi Arabia. The first few meetings I had, we didn't even get to business. I got so frustrated. It's like, well, I want to talk to you about signing this deal. We were talking about land crossing. We were digging a fiber optic cable. I had to get the job done. And I tell you, I went there for a week. I stayed there for a month because the first couple of weeks I couldn't even get to business. The person kept asking me, how many kids do you have? Let me introduce you to my family. And what you don't realize is that having a relationship is critical to doing business. You can't do business without a relationship. In India, if you're a lawyer, you're out of luck because all the agreements are just based on trust. Here, I'll put a sign here. I know you well. Okay, so it's a very different way of looking at business. So if you look, and by the way, high relationship orientation for Latin American countries. Look at the low relationship environments. Built quickly, dissolved quickly, not required for deals. Financial issues more important, closure and focus more important. Willingness to work hard, contracts and lawyers required, fax and phone sufficient, proximity proportionate to strength. On the right-hand side, relationships take longer to build. They take longer to build. But once built, they last longer. They last longer. I sent a lot of work to India when I was at Verizon, a lot of call center work, and a lot of folks from my team went to India. And I had warned them about this in advance. They were still surprised. They got off the plane. They were greeted by the vendor, some representative of the vendor that they were working with. And the first thing the person said, they had never seen this person before, the first thing they said was, why are you staying in a hotel? You should come stay with us. So I had warned them in advance that this will happen. And this hospitality, which is a warm part of the relationship culture in India, comes at a hidden price. Because if you go to their house, pretty soon they'll be asking about your marital status and how come you aren't married and how many kids you have and when do you plan to have more. You have to be careful about the intrusive aspects of that. But the fact is that relationship is important to do business, and that's why it happens a lot of the time. Deals require relationships. Interpersonal comfort is important. Time spent to know the other party. Recourse to law is secondary, face-to-face meetings better. Distance does not affect relationships as much. So again, very quickly, knowing these characteristics and knowing the profile of the group, which is slightly skewed to the left, where do you think Disney would be in terms of relationship orientation, professional versus personal? High relationship or low relationship? High relationship. Almost consensus. A couple people are saying no.
I think again, it depends on where you're at. I think if you're at a Disneyland, it's, Manny, that's very high. Much higher to me than here at Walt Disney World, because we are so large. So I think it really
It depends on where you are, but a lot of people feel it's very high relationship orientation, but again, it could vary depending on where you are. One of the interesting things we found, by the way, at a consulting company, and a lot of Latinos gave us this feedback, they said, people here are very friendly, they're very friendly, but you don't feel the warmth. And I couldn't understand what that meant. But I don't know if that's true at Disney, but it's an interesting distinction where you say people are friendly up to a point, but you can't get to them beyond that point. At least for a lot of Latinos, they felt that sense of being part of a family, of genuine, authentic caring that goes beyond just a polite interaction was missing, okay? But I would say, think about that. And again, X, Y, Z, make sure you're plotting that, because that's important for you to see how close you are to Latino cultures and how close you are to the Disney culture. We'll
Yeah.
keep going. Yeah.
Staying on that, when you were asking the questions about, there's also a thing that's saying we don't have time to build a relationship, right? And so they basically say we don't have time, so let's just get to the point. Let's just go to and I will tell you, when I moved, that was one of the toughest things that happened to me when I moved to Latin America. And by the 1 hour meetings, you never have 1 hour meetings, okay? Because of what you were saying about the fact that the first 15 or 20 minutes is nothing more than trying to relate to you. We haven't got into any of the business yet. And so I did this for about 3 months. I would have hour meetings, and then I gave up. I just gave up. And I started making them hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, because I knew the first half an hour would be what? The chit-chat. Also, the hugging and the kissing. Well, this is the best part of our relationship, the hugging and kissing. Okay? I mean, look outside. At the convention here, you will see more hugging and kissing than you've ever seen, okay? Eugene's become a better hugger since the first time I met him. I mean, the first time I met him, he wanted to pat me like this. I said, give me a hug, Eugene. But he's getting better at it. Every time I see him, he hugs better. But the thing is, it's a very touchy, what is that, a touchy warmth feeling. And that's the stuff that you will see when you go outside here, and you'll start seeing it. I think we just touched on that, colleague, warm versus friendly. Here's an assumption that supervisors will be concerned, involved, and engaged personally, because that's what you want them to be, okay? But some of them don't have the time to. Some of them don't. Yes? Is there a... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this company was really founded on the basis of that family bond, and that was perpetuated over many, many years. And in the last decade or so, we've had some downturns, and that significantly, I think, affected how we view the people that work for us, because we've had to have layoffs, and it became clear that you don't lay off your family, right? So there's been a very significant change, I think, from a leadership perspective, to remember that this is a business. And I think I think I've seen that anyway.
Well, one thing is that there is a trust factor, and you've got to be truthful, by the way, not only but if you're giving an evaluation, by the way, and you have a great relationship with the person you're giving it, what are the chances you're really going to talk about the things they need to work on? And what do you think the chances are you're going to basically delve and say, you know what, you really have no future here, okay? But if that's what they need to hear, you can't let your relationship overcome the business end at the end of the day, and that's what you guys are feeling somewhat, okay? But that doesn't mean that it has to be entirely different. You have to avoid relationship and everything. But you're right. That's unfortunate. Sometimes you got to tell the tough. What's the reality of this stuff? Strong personal relationships are valued. Loyalty to specific supervisors may exclude loyalty to the organization. By the way, this is a good trait. A lot of people like this trait, huh? Objective, detached interactions may be considered negative, and one-on-one discussions, that's really key, because that's a relationship building. The one-on-one interviews, the one-on-one discussions, the one-on-one mentoring, the one-on-one sponsorships, that's you're building a relationship. You're connecting. It's that warmth connection that Latinos really thrive on. Building trusting relationships, a core behavior, okay, intellectual objectivity and rigorous prizes of trust. Here's a key thing. Take the time to find out about the person, not just the candidate if you're interviewing somebody. But here again, when we talked about it, we kind of make fun that they want to talk 15 minutes or 20 minutes about your dog and your grandparents and everything else. I think it is important to get to know people. And I think that the more that you practice at that, the more loyalty you will get out of the individuals, and the more that they'll basically, your message, they'll be listening much more. So really, I think this relationship thing is extremely, extremely important in getting deals done. And I will tell you that when I started, with ALPFA, one of the things I wanted to build was a business relationship, okay, versus just I wanted to build a relationship with our corporate partner and not have it just be a business transaction. And I think that a lot of the success of Alpha and the success with our corporate partners is that I and our team cared about building a relationship, okay? I don't know how many dinners and lunches and breakfasts or whatever that Eugene and Lourdes and I have had over the years, but that was important because we were building a relationship. And the business transaction happened because of that. And it wasn't always, I still remember with Disney when I first came to them, I asked them for $25,000 and they gave me $10,000 and they threw in some Mickey Mouses. The next year I went to Disney and I asked for $25,000. They gave me $15,000 and they threw in some Minnie Mouses this time. The third year they gave me $100,000. I thought I was there. But the fourth year was that memorable time when Eugene and Lourdes, and team signed $1 million. So, but a lot of that was my helping and them allowing me to build a relationship with them. I took my kids to Disney World. I met my grandkids to Disney World and my family this last year, October. They had gifts. Disney had gifts. Not just for me, by the way. They gave me a great Prisoner wine. By the way, if anybody likes wine, Prisoner wine is a great wine. But they gave me, but it's what they did for my grandkids. They had a gift there for my grandkids. That's a relationship. How do you think I feel about Disney and the people that gave me that? Okay? But again, they're reaching out. They're doing something different. And that relationship thing is extremely, extremely important. I think Disney does it terrifically. Okay. So this is how good are you telling the truth? Okay. All right. Moving on. I don't even know if you need this.
Okay. By the way, as you think about relationships, also think about your resource groups. Sometimes, we go to a lot of companies and they say, the resource groups have kind of devolved into a coffee club. They get together after work and they, have nachos and they have soda. And I don't see the business impact of these groups. I will tell you, the Gallup findings are very clear. One of the strongest, stickiest ways to keep people at a firm is to make sure they have one or two best friends at work. Okay, those relationships do count. So do not underestimate the power of some of the coffee clutches and some of the stuff that happens as part of building that fabric, because it'll keep good employees at Disney better than almost other financial incentives would. Okay, I'm going to go through these very, very quickly. So you can rate yourself. Please do that offline. Please make sure and do that, okay? I want you to see on this communication indirectness, explicit versus implicit. USA is very low indirectness, so relatively direct. Now, it's not the most direct. The most direct you can see on the extreme left, okay? But it's quite direct. Now, look at the Latin American or the Hispanic cultures, more indirect. And you will see evidence of this in the way people talk. Like I was just on a phone recently talking about another program at convention, and one of the people on the phone asked a question about the sequence of the slides. But she didn't come out and say, the sequence. She didn't say, she said, do you think the slides are sequenced correctly? Do you think? And, I answered, as a client, I think they are, and then something hit me saying, she's not asking a question, she's telling me something. She's telling me that she's not happy with the way that, and so I went back and, but that's what is not said sometimes, and Jose will testify to this because he knows it better than anybody. But it's sometimes what is not said that matters more than what's said in Hispanic cultures. Remember this, because you might overlook this. It may not be a direct, question and answer. It may be an indirect suggestion, or it may be a glance or a certain, nonverbal cue, because there's a lot of indirect. So if you look at low, very direct culture, simple and direct, clear and concise, indirect is considered evasive and untruthful in direct cultures. Okay? It's like, what are you hiding? Why don't you just come out and tell me what you're thinking? Point of view is expected. Good questions are highly valued. Business info. Bosses are more info than subordinates. Content, not context. Content, not context. Very important, right? You know, the military has this whole thing, right? I don't know if some of you are ex-military, but they have this thing called BLUF, bottom line up front, where put your executive summary up front, like what is the recommendation, BLUF, like bottom line up front. General Latino cultures are not like that. Generally, you lead up to the bottom line, okay? Direct cultures say, give me the content first and the context later. Tell me what you're saying first and then the rationale afterwards, okay? What is spoken matters, not how. Body language less important. Saving face may not be important. It's very direct. Indirect, look at how this is. Direct may not convey completely. Implicit, nonverbal. Direct criticism is taken personally. So when you're giving feedback, coaching appraisals, you know, maybe be even kinder and gentler in how you say it. I mean, still you have to give firm messages, but how you deliver the message may impact whether the person listens to you or not. Sometimes the tone of our voice overwhelms the content of our message for people. And they've just tuned you out, you don't even realize it, right? What you're saying is absolutely correct, but how you're saying it gets in the way. Context, nonverbal nuances, saving face is critical. So again, think about where Disney would be on this. I won't ask you the question, but it's important for you to kind of reflect on that. Manny?
Yep. So general tendency to avoid personal conflict, okay? Desire to maintain smooth, pleasant social relationships. One of the reasons I was sent to Latin America by PricewaterhouseCoopers was because we were getting, you know, every year we get an evaluation about the service, okay, at each of these subsidiaries, U.S. subsidiaries. And we were getting one from this the CFO saying, service is terrible. I can't, you know, this is really bad. So I went down and I checked up on this partner, this CFO, and I went to him personally and I said, hey, you are saying these things about our Mexican partner. Can you elaborate a little bit more? And he said, oh, no. You know, I think, you know, they exaggerated what I said on the survey and all this kind of stuff. And I said, you sure? Yeah. And I went to the Mexican partner. He said, oh, I'm getting great. They always say great things to me. And I'm sure that was happening. I'm sure he would go to the Mexican partner and he would say, great service, when really on the evaluation, and this happened 2 years in a row, where right after I interviewed not only the Mexican partner, but the CFO, coming away saying everything's great, we get another evaluation. And what did it say? Things are not so great here, okay? So this thing about avoiding confrontation was really high, that we had to kind of look beyond and ask different kind of questions on how we deal with these things. There's, you know, in the Latino culture, there is a biasness towards emphasizing positive behaviors versus and de-emphasizing negative behavior. Again, we talked about that in evaluation, right? I mean, how many times do people start an evaluation and it's an hour evaluation or whatever it is, and they spend 50 minutes on all the great things the person's doing, and the last 10 minutes for what you need to work on? When really it should almost be reversed, right? You should be focusing on what they need to work on to get higher advancement and quicker advancement than to focus on all the great things they're doing, because they're doing them well, but focus on some of the negatives. And unfortunately, you know, the Latino culture does like to focus on the positive behaviors. Appearance of agreement, even though there's not a clear understanding of the decision or question. A yes doesn't necessarily mean a yes. You know, this does not necessarily mean that. What does it mean sometimes? I heard you, right, I heard you. It doesn't necessarily mean they agree. And so, pick up on those things, you know. And by the way, we're very empathetic people, and if you don't show any kind of sympathy for us, you could harm the relationship. So if it's all business and no relationship, it's not going to go well. There's no doubt that putting ourselves and having empathy is a very, very important thing in order to be successful. Accurate and precise and written communication is required, and what I'm saying here, it's not just your actions, it's just not what you say, but you better communicate clearly, okay, what you're trying to say. Don't peddle around. And I think, you know, in this particular case, this is one of the things, I think you already mentioned it, but get to the point. Have you ever asked somebody something and they don't answer the question? And they're, you know, well, let me just tell you about this, and what you really want, just answer the question, okay? And a lot of it has to do, they have to get pumped up before they come up with that thing. Well, pump them up faster, okay? All right, make it happen, okay? But I think it is important trait, I think, to be successful, that you've got to basically, you know, get to the point at a very short bit. helping them make a decision quickly, even though it might harm people or, hurt people, How do you become a great decision maker? You make a lot of decisions, right? You make a lot of quick decisions. That's how you become a great decision maker. It's not making the decisions. Again, Gita, can you tell time without building a watch? Get to the point, right? Okay.
So we'll skip this for now because we're sort of running out of time. Let's get to the next value of time control. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this. I have, in my personal experience with the Latino cultures, having attended many Latino parties. The party begins when the food comes and the music starts, and it ends when the food is done and the music is over. Okay. On the other hand, I've been to other parties where it starts at 7 and by 10 o'clock, I need my house back, get out, right? I say that in jest, but it literally is a difference in fluidity of time. Now, some people would say Latino Standard Time or Indian Standard Time. I'll cop to that, rap. But it's not that people are not mindful of time. It's important to understand this. There are some cultures are so focused on the present and on getting the maximum out of the present that they may not think as far in advance as others might. Okay? It's another way to look at it is polychronic time. In other words, time works in different dimensions. You're focused on this right now, and you're not thinking you have a deadline to meet tomorrow. You're focused on what you're doing today. And so Latino cultures tend to be like that. Again, you can rate yourself on it. You can see that, very low time control. So on the left-hand side now, a lot of the Latin cultures are there. On the right-hand side, you have countries like the USA where delivering on deadline is critical. And if you don't do it on a consistent basis, it's going to count against you. Coming to meetings on time is critical. Manny's old saying is, if you're on time for a meeting, you're late. If you want to be on time, you need to be early, okay, and never be really late because then you're done. That's how he is. But that's kind of how a lot of U.S. cultures tend to be. And I'm not sure where Disney would fall, but that's something for you to think about. And again, low, sort of high, if you look at a lot of fluidity in time, like low time control, schedule adherence is low, buffer time required, competence not judged by time, lateness, absence common, harmony more important, plans change often, it's a lot of fluidity. Project deadlines are flexible, On the right-hand side, being precisely on time, meetings begin and end, lateness is a sign of incompetence, abrupt end of meetings, efficiency priced over harmony, plans expected to be sacrosanct, project deadlines more rigid. So there is a huge difference, and again, I know I experienced it, giving work to India, 6 months late. It was incredible. I said, what happened? This is my own paisan, my friends. I'm like, you can't do this to me, but it happens, and so now I've learned to build in a cushion because that's how it's nothing wrong, it's just a different way of thinking, build in a 2-month cushion. Same thing in terms of indirect communication. I remember going to the Indian vendor saying, this particular platform should be fine, right? We were talking about some data transfer thing. And they said, yeah, we should be able to work with it. I made an assumptive statement, a presumptive statement that the platform would be good, and they went along with it. 6 months later, when the project was like a couple $1 million overrun and late, I said, because of the platform issue, I said, why didn't you tell me? I said, well, we thought that's what you wanted. So the reason I mentioned to you, and I got fooled by my own culture, right? So it's important to understand, sometimes, it's better to ask the question, and even though you have a strong opinion, not share it because it'll overwhelm, a group, groups that are more prone to go along. Go ahead, Manny, on that.
My daughter-in-law is from Minnesota, and I've been to my last 2 grandkids' birthday parties in Washington, D.C., and one of them was at 11 o'clock in the morning. 11 o'clock, who goes to a party? What Latinos go to a party at 11 o'clock in the morning? They're barely getting up. But the thing is, it was from 11 to 1, okay? And then the next party they had was from 4 to 6, okay? And I remember the invitations that my wife would send out. She would say, party starts at 4, but would never have an ending. Just come at 4 o'clock, okay? And it was even the buying, like when they sent me out to the grocery store, and I said, how much beer do we want? She said, oh, just get a couple of 6-packs. couple six-packs? Man, that's what I drink. I said, what about all the people that are going to come? Because at a Latino party, I would have get a keg or something like that because they're still going to be drinking at 7 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. And the thing is, it's such a different thing how she could basically start it on time and end on time. That has never been like a party at Manny Espinoza's house, ever, okay? But the thing is that time viewed as a precious commodity. It's so important for that time. I think Suri may have mentioned this, but my very first meeting, and I go back to my Latin American days, and so I had a meeting set up for 10 o'clock, and I'm looking at my watch. 10:30 comes, 10:45 comes, and the person shows up at 10:45, and I'm asking him, "Oh, what happened? Bad traffic?" Nope. I'm waiting for the excuse on why they were 45 minutes late. There was no excuse. It was just the way they did. They just, and I gave him the opportunity, but never did he even comment about, oh no, and apologize or anything. So they have a different tendency, and again, exaggerating a little bit, but this actually happened to me, okay? But so it does happen, okay? Time commitments are considered more of a guideline than a rigid commitment. Okay, that's in corporate America that doesn't really fly too much. Okay, orientations towards the present. Okay, they're more focused on, am I having a good time right now? Are we doing something right now? Versus what's going to happen later on in the day or tomorrow or whatever it is. Okay, tendency towards staying calm in the face of urgent demands. This is an interesting thing. I talk about making a decision under pressure. Okay, have anybody ever made a decision under pressure? You did, okay. I made a bad mistake, and I told my boss one time, okay, I don't want to pressure you into making this decision, and he stopped me. And he says, I'm immune to pressure. He says, I'm immune to pressure. I do not make decisions because I'm pressured into them. I will only make good decisions, okay? And it kind of reminded me of something about, that was, you don't have to always make a decision under pressure. And Latinos tend to be a little bit more like that. They give me more information, okay? Give me more stuff, okay? And okay, well, on-time delivery in a deadline-driven business is critical firm success. I would think that all of this stuff is important to Disney. Speed with quality, okay? How do you become so good that even in their speeding times, you're giving added value to the company? Here's that. Grace under pressure can be highly leverageable asset. I think that I think it's important to check with time management skills and get people a little bit more focused on time. It's really interesting, but I'm always looking at my watch, and Suri doesn't look at his watch. Do you have a watch, by the way?
I don't.
You do not have a watch. Okay, that's why he's not looking at it. The thing is, so I'm the time controller and all this kind of stuff. But I've seen some people that don't even look at it, okay, at all, okay, whether in a time commitment. And so I've always known to be taken out, and when I look, it's getting close, I'll even take my watch off and put it out there to kind of give an element that we're running out of time. But there are certain things you can do to get better at it. Anyway, I think that there is a bad rap. I think not all Latinos are late, okay, or they wouldn't have a job, all right. But it's not as important. I think the point is here, it's not as important. Those deadlines are not as important sometimes. It's that present moment. It's the relationship. It's about the present versus the future. That's most important about this. Okay. Can you land your plane on a short runway?
So we're in the home stretch now. Change tolerance. Again, I'll tell you, if you look at the grid, a lot of the Latin American countries have low to moderate change tolerance. There's a lot of stability that's part of Latino environments. So if there is a lot of transformation happening in a short time, chances are, the average Latino will be a little bit, discombobulated as a result, because the general culture tends to be more in favor of stable, long-term, consistent trajectories. Whether it's at work in terms of gradual ascendancy to the top, whether it's in terms of the home front, there's a lot of focus on stability. Obviously, in the U.S., it's a highly changing environment. And with Disney, I would imagine you're constantly, doing things differently, okay? And so that's something to keep in mind, is there is a natural sort of dichotomy between the way, the culture thinks in terms of change and the way the company might want you to think in terms of business effectiveness and success, okay? And then you can see some of the characteristics of low versus high change tolerance. And please, again, look at Disney and see where you think Disney might be and where do you think you are and where do you think the Latino culture is. Manny, you want to get to the next slides?
Sure. Latinos think that consistency and constant, the same thing is okay. They're, why change things for the sake of changing them? Rapid change can be, in life situations, can be a challenge. But what's unfortunate about this is that change is happening all the time, okay? People are now requiring you not only to be adapt to change, but basically be a visionary, okay? How can you basically, talking about change and talking about those kind of things? I think that's really an important trait to pick up, okay? But if you don't like change, what's to force you to become a visionary and all this kind of stuff? Latino culture, incremental improvement tends to be favored versus rapid, okay? Rapid things, okay? Lead time may be required for transformational change when you don't even have that lead time. Fast-moving, unpredictable environments may be a challenge. Greater emphasis on advancement through tenure and seniority. Tenure and seniority is really big in Latino. Remember that respect part? For them, that's very, the longer you stay, the higher up, the more respect you get, the more everything else. But we live in a fast-paced and fast-changing business environment, and so they have to develop, the skill level of being able to adapt to change. I always tell a little story, and I think I can tell it, but I used to say, like, I would come in on a trip, and I would say, on the way here, believe it or not, I did not see any dinosaurs out there, okay? And then I also said a couple of other things. I said cockroaches, you have to be smarter than a cockroach. And so I would say you have to be smarter than a cockroach, all right? And then I would say on the way here, I didn't see any dinosaurs. And so I started inquiring, why didn't I see any dinosaurs? Now, why do you think I didn't see any dinosaurs out here outside of Disney? Why are there no dinosaurs other than play ones? What happened to them? Huh? They're gone. Why? They couldn't adapt to change, right? Dinosaurs could not adapt to change. But those damn cockroaches, years, thousands of years, and they still exist. They're even getting bigger. I don't care what poison you use or whatever it is. They're still around because they can adapt to change. Cockroaches can adapt to change, okay? They'll figure out how to work it out, okay? But how do you be smarter than a cockroach? You got to plan for change, right? You got to plan for change. And that's one of the key things that I say. When I say you have to be smarter than a cockroach, you got to plan for change, plan for the fact, plan to take risk, plan to make decisions and do all that kind of stuff.
And the one thing I might add to that is if you have Latinos in your organization or you're recruiting Latinos, emphasize the longer-term stability and security. I know Disney has had to go backwards a little bit on that, but it is still, when you look at other companies in America, it is still a place where people come and can build a long-term career. And I think that'll be very important from a Latino perspective, that stability and security.
This thing about how comfortable are you with being uncomfortable, it's really interesting. When you're in a top leadership position, I don't ever know if you ever get comfortable because you're always doing something different, okay? And if you get too comfortable, then that's really when they start saying, wait a minute, maybe something's wrong here, okay? But I think in a leadership position, because of the fact that you're in a fast-paced environment and you're always changing things, you're always going to feel some uncomfortable because you're not going to have all the answers, right? You're going to be going into situations in which you got to trust, okay? You got to trust your decisions without all the facts. So if you had all the facts, you'd be a terrible decision maker. You'd probably never get married, right? Because you wouldn't know all the facts, okay? Probably never buy a car or a computer because there's always a new one coming out, okay? But I think a good decision maker makes a lot of decisions without all the facts, okay? And hopefully they get better and better at it.
And here is the work importance. So again, vocation versus vacation. How important is work-life balance to you? Again, Latino cultures tend to be, work-life balance tends to be extremely important, and it's very closely associated with the sense of family that they have. So we find over and over in a lot of clients that we visit, Latinos tend to be the ones that pass up on the tougher assignments, that if it requires relocation, they will tend not to go for it. If it requires longer working hours, they'll say, no, I want to spend time with family. And the concept of family is more extended family. It's not even immediate family. So I think, when you look at vocations versus vacation, the US tends to be relatively high on the work side, okay? And obviously China and Japan are much more, right? Folks in Japan will finish work at 6 o'clock, go drink sake with their buddies, and then actually, there are actually hotels. Have you seen this? There's actually hotels in Japan where you have bunk beds for executives. I don't know if you saw the Seinfeld episode where they had Japanese executives in a big wardrobe type of thing. They literally have that. People actually stay back right next to work so they can go into work in the morning. That's how bad it is, okay? Literally, it's really bad. But on the left-hand side, you see some countries like France, Germany, and so on, where it's a 35-hour work week, 6-week vacations. And I have experience. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we all should be working there. It's absolutely fantastic. But if you look in the US, we're kind of more on the side of China and Japan. But if you look at Latino cultures, it's a little more focused on the life part of the work-life balance. And you can see some of the characteristics of organizations. And again, make a judgment on where Disney is, where you are, and where the Latino culture is. Go ahead.
I can attest to that. Those 2-hour lunches that start out with tequila, they were great lunches, by the way. But the thing is that you're right. They were more focused on that, just the time, just building a relationship, having a good time, and it wasn't as important. But the family, I think you brought it up earlier. I think the lady back there brought out the family culture. We are very family oriented, and we bring. It's interesting. A relationship. It doesn't take much time to build a relationship. Okay, a Latino can build a relationship very, very quickly, and you can see them. Getting back to the hugs and all that kind of stuff. That happens very, very quickly, by the way. That doesn't happen over a year. Sometimes on the very first time you visit them, it's almost, they feel compelled for the very first time to kind of, okay, give them a hug, okay? But very, very extended family. I've always said, Alpha is my extended family. I feel that our board members, our corporate advisory board members, all the corporate partners are part of my extended family. That's how I feel about them, and I think in the Latino culture, they think like that, okay? It may shy away from career aspirations. I remember when I was deciding, I was out of college about a year and a half, and I got an opportunity to move from Tucson to Albuquerque. Now, that's not a very long distance, but for my family, it's why are you moving across the country? Okay, Tucson to Albuquerque. And I got a lot of people saying, why would you move? You got all the family here, and it was a really tough decision for me. I mean, it got a lot easier. Each of my career moves got a lot easier, but the family always questioned, why are you moving? Okay, and so I could see how some people. My dad was the one. I wasn't even going to go to the interview, and my dad said, "What do you have to lose?" Okay, he convinced me a day before. He says, "What do you have to lose?" And so I went, but I'd already said I wasn't going to go, and a lot of that was just the family pressures. With that, I think the key thing is, improving family life is an important motivator for wealth acquisition, but also for just staying on the job. And so people are expecting more and more of that balance. And I think the key thing is, how do we get to that balance where he says, that you can emphasize work, but also emphasize family life. And for Latinos, that is extremely important. So I think Disney, thinks about those kind of things, but you got to put a lot of thought into it, because nowadays it's not just what you pay them, okay? It's their lifestyle, both out of work and in work. And so they're going to look at these things. For Latinos, they're going to look at this stuff and say, what kind of mobility is it? What kind of do I have to work 60 hours a week? I still remember a partner in Mexico told me, Manny, you're different. I say, why is that? Because he says, you live to work. And he says, we work to live, okay? And the thing is, and that was really predominant. And he said it to me real personally. Why is everything business? Why is it so focused? And I keep remembering that phrase that he says. Sir, I'm going to give you this back.
So we're going to skip the exercise, but bottom line is when you map these 7 variables, right, if you actually score yourself and score countries, here's how the scores turn out, okay? And you can see some sample countries here, but look at the Caribbean, okay, and look at the USA, for example, on these same 7 variables. What do you see as a pattern when you compare those two? Mirror opposites. Mirror opposites. Very close to the US geographically, but culturally there's a big, big distance. The areas where the Caribbean is high, the whole hierarchical group orientation, relationship, communication, look, the US is quite low. And then the areas where they're moderate, the US is actually quite high. So there are mirror opposites. So again, being aware of this and adjusting both as a business and as a constituency from both sides, adjusting is important so that you can meet in the middle. The other important thing here I'd say to you is, this is blank for you. What is your profile on these characteristics? And what's Disney's profile, the way you experience it? That's important, right? Wherever you're sitting at Disney, how would Disney map and how would you map? And understanding this is the first step to addressing some of the opportunities and also leveraging some of the strengths that you have, okay? Again, this is a table that I think is in your participant guides, but if you look at Latino values versus Anglo values, we talked a lot about this list in a slightly different manner, but this is a more sort of available resource if you're looking for it. I won't go over it, but you can see a lot of the differences. But the bottom line is, well, yeah, if it's not in there, we'll send it to you. It's a good reference list to have. But this is essentially what we talked about. You saw the 7 global moderating variables. You saw the Latino cultural values that map to those variables. And then hopefully you also saw some enhancing actions, not for so much for interviews, but interaction enhancing actions that we can take to bridge that gap. And ultimately, that's what cultural dexterity is all about. Cherish your values, acknowledge your strengths, be who you are, never change that, be proud of that. At the same time, be willing to develop your skills and bridge to the culture that you're in. There's also a key source list. I know this is in your participant guide, so if you want more information, feel free to go out and get it. That sort of concludes the session, but before you leave, I do want to ask, we have a few more minutes, and you know what's coming, right? So Disney measures everything. So you have a survey, please fill it out, and once you fill it out, do we have certificates, James, to offer everyone? So here's the deal that I'll make with you. Give us the survey and we'll give you a certificate. Thank you all for participating today. We really appreciate the time on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you.